the audience, think through the madness of registration and buses across the city. So appreciate you getting here, and hello to those joining online. We have 4 amazing speakers here and also a speaker joining virtually. So I'll introduce each of them shortly. But to start off, my name is James Ellsmore. I'm the CEO of Island Innovation. We are an international network on island sustainability, trying to bring conversations together, bringing the government sector, private, public, academic, and NGOs together to have conversations like this. And I'm really happy to be here for what I think is a very important conversation on Pacific Island leadership, on ocean climate and energy, and more broadly, SIDS leadership. And what we want to discuss today is how can small island states or large ocean states reposition themselves to show leadership on these issues at the COP, and what does leadership mean in this context? Leadership is not just the politicians having debates in the center, but encompasses youth, women, indigenous peoples, and of course, other sectors beyond government as well. And so we want to explore from all of our panelists today, what leadership means for them, and how they see the opportunity for small island states to lead. So with that being said, I'll quickly run through the panelists, and then in the same order, ask them to open for 2 or 3 minutes just to introduce themselves a little bit more and share their opening thoughts on the topic. Really excited to have these speakers. So we have Ivory Vogt, who is from the Palau delegation, a youth delegate. We have Philemone Tuivanua-Levu, who is one of the AOSIS fellows and can share more about the AOSIS fellowship program, which is a really fantastic initiative for small island youth to get experience in these fora. Joining remotely, we have Apana Pratap, who is the Director of Blue Economy from the Pacific Island Development Forum. We can't see you, Apana, but I was promised that you can see and hear us, and feel free to jump in at any moment when you have comments. We're looking forward to your thoughts. We have Augusto Pino, who's the Director of the National Directorate for Climate Change from Timor-Leste. And then finally, last but not least, we have Raquel Moses, who is the UN Global SIDS Ambassador for the Race to Zero and Race to Resilience, and the CEO of the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. So thanks, Raquel. Glad to have you here to add a Caribbean perspective to these conversations. So with that, I'll hand over to Ivory for your opening thoughts.
Aling and Tutao. Thank you, James. Can you guys hear me? Let me try again. Oh, there we go. I said Aling il Tutao. That's hello and good morning in Palauan. Thank you, James, and thank you to Island Innovation for having me be part of the panel. So I'm part of the Palau delegation. I'm a youth negotiator this year. It's my first COP, and I specialize in carbon markets, Article 6, so under the mitigation work program. Besides being a youth negotiator at this COP, I work for a company called Sustainable Travel International, where I measure the carbon footprint for travel companies and help them mitigate that footprint through carbon offset projects around the world. I'm also part of the Sustainable Ocean Alliance Youth Policy Advisory Council, where I get together with youth from around the world and we discuss the most eminent and pressing ocean issues of our time. And to answer your question, what does leadership mean to me? As a youth, I think leadership, I admire leaders that lead by example. And I would say in Palau, we're inspired by our environment, the respect we have for our environment, the relationship we have with our environment. So really, we're driven by our love and relationship with the ocean specifically. That really inspires our way of life and also in turn, how we lead and our relationships with one another. Those are the important aspects of what leadership means to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivory, for that introduction. Philemone, it would be great to hear from you, and also for those not aware, a little bit more about the AOSIS fellowship that you're part of.
My name is Philemone Tuivanua-Levu. Of course, I'm from Fiji and an AOSIS fellow. So as you know, AOSIS is the Alliance of Small Island States. It's a core negotiating group representing our our voices as smaller and developing states. And as fellows, we are embedded with our missions in New York, and it helps us get experience that we can take back to our country to be more, to enable more competent representation and enable us to have a better standing in the multilateral process. Apart from that, I work with a climate team in the climate adaptation field, and I also cover loss and damage in negotiations. So for us, I think a key thing about leadership when it comes to this space of climate, renewable energy, and oceans is, of course, that when we come to these big COPs, that we do not come unprepared, that we implement nationally. And I think that is something that my country has tried its best to ensure that we have been undertaking throughout the years. And we recently enacted our Climate Change Act. And before that, in order for the Climate Change Act to be established, we had a mountain of policies that had to first be in play to ensure that the infrastructure was there that would enable the Climate Change Act, which just got released, I think, the end of last year. And still a lot more work to go, and a lot more ambitions for us to fulfill. Thank you.
Thank you, Philemone. I'm hoping Apana can join remotely. Can we see Apana on the screen?
Hello, I think the host has blocked my video. However, I can speak. Bula Vinaka and greetings to you all. For me, defining the development pathway and taking ownership of the development process needs discussion at the local level. So community leadership to start with, and communities need to drive processes, and partners and donors need to align and have responsive mechanisms that enable them to do so. The PESP region have established a few elements of the regional policy frameworks that supports marine management and climate change and energy in the region. For instance, we have the Pacific Islands Regional Ocean Policy, which was the outcome of the 1999 Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Meeting. And the Pacific governments, I feel, have taken an effective approach by leading the way in implementing national ocean policies and commitments in regards to climate change and energy, such as designating, for example, marine protected areas. For instance, Fiji will be designating 30% of its 1.2 million kilometers of ocean within its economic exclusive zones is marine protected areas, with 100% sustainable management of its EEZ by 2030. So these are some of the initiatives that Fiji and the Pacific are taking to lead the way in combating climate change impacts. So, and I think the PCs, the Pacific Small Islands Development States, are now faced with the daunting task of recovering from the pandemic, while also meeting their long-term development aspirations, such as attaining the Sustainable Development Goals and building resilient communities from the current climate emergency here. So that's my thoughts on the topic.
Thank you so much, Apana. Just so you know, it's a little bit hard for us to hear you on the stage, but I'm assured that our virtual audience will be able to hear you very well. So I think that on the recording, we'll be able to share that as well. But we'll do our best to be able to hear you. And I'll also highlight that Pacific Island Development Forum is doing some fantastic work. We'll be back on Friday for another session to share some of the PIDF's work, specifically around solarization of Pacific Island government buildings, which is a great example of leadership, government leaders in the Pacific Islands taking the initiative to install solar on significant buildings that are prominent and demonstrate leadership by example. So Friday morning, we'll be back here to talk about that some more. Augusto, over to you.
Thank you very much. for inviting us to join this side event. I'm Augusto Pinto from Timor-Leste, working under the State Secretary for Environment, Coordinator Minister for Economic Affairs. I've been working for this directorate since 2000 after we restore our independence, separated from Indonesian occupation. When you are talking about leadership related to climate negotiation, I think as small island state, we need to be active in negotiation so that there should be a balance between developed countries, developing states, small island states, and also LDCs, so that our voice can be heard and how we can negotiate with the rest of the parties in responding to climate adaptation, mitigation, and cross-sectoral issues. Because otherwise, even though you have a leadership at the national level, but you are not active in the process, in the negotiation process, then your voice will not be listened or will not be heard. And then how can you mobilize means of implementation, financial resources, capacity building, and transfer of technology? So I think to me is you need to show your leadership, and it should be united, because one party cannot do or cannot influence many other parties, to negotiate climate change issues. Because I've been attending several COPs like UN, CBD, and also others. This one is mostly political issues. So your voice should be united, and then you need to join in the group. Otherwise, as Prime Minister of Barbados said in her statement yesterday, people talking a lot about the climate finance, talking about loss and damage, mitigation, adaptation, but we don't really find a consensus, because the issue is about the political will. Because if you don't have political will at the national level, regional, and then under the parties like United Nations level, I think we are not pessimists, but we will spend quite a lot of time how to handle all these kind of issues. This is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Augusto, for that perspective. Must be very interesting to bring the world of what's happening inside the negotiations out here to the rest of the Blue Zone. Sometimes I think we're in a COP like this, and what's happening in the negotiation and these conversations out here in the pavilion sometimes are quite separate in a way. So we need to make sure we don't lose sight of that. Last but not least, Raquel, I'd be very interested for you to bring in a perspective, not just from the Caribbean, but in your role of SIDS globally. Obviously here we're in the Pacific Pavilion. Most of the speakers are from the Pacific region. But what do you see that unites what is happening and what you're doing in the Caribbean with actions taking place in other small island states around the world?
Sure, and thanks so much for having me, James. You can hear me? Not really. All right. So thank you so much for having me, James. I think the interesting thing, and the session that came before this one as well, what was really interesting about it is that at the end of the day, even the people that we consider our adversaries in this fight, we're all fighting for the same thing, to maintain our way of life. And the thing is that some of us, our way of life is under threat by others' way of life. And if we can find that common ground to say, I understand that you want to maintain your lifestyle, but it can't be at the expense of my lifestyle. It can't be at the expense of my life. And so I think finding that common ground, first of all, and understanding the other side and the pushback that we're getting from them as to why they are lagging in the changes that are necessary for us to all be able to survive. I think that's the first thing that we all need to do. But I think the second thing is we talk a lot about them. So it's the politicians, it is the oil and gas companies, it is all of these other people. At the end of the day, it isn't any one bad guy. There isn't one villain, you know what I mean? It is all of us just trying to live. And so the more that we can find ways to find common ground. So for us in the region, in the Caribbean, what we're trying to do is to understand that the transition needs to take place, and how do we create our economy on that future transition? How do we future-proof our economies by creating jobs in renewables, by creating jobs in the circular economy, by creating new ways of doing things that others can learn from to see how much better it could be when we are all able to thrive. So I think it is more about understanding who we're speaking to, and it is less about speaking to individuals. The politicians are empowered by their people. So we need to speak to the people, and we need to speak to people about people issues. We need to understand where they are and be able to have a conversation about, listen, your lifestyle, understanding that you need to keep that, but let's figure out how we can keep some middle ground so that we all get to survive and thrive in a completely new and beautiful economy.
Well, while we're on you, I'll start with another question. One of the really interesting aspects about your work is the involvement of the private sector, and specifically using or building an opportunity for startups from the Caribbean to have an influence, which I think is really important. So could you talk on, in these kind of conversations, not just at the COP, but more broadly on climate change, what do you see as a role for the private sector, whether it's big corporations or small scale entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so what we know is that the latest data is that there's $95 trillion that needs to be spent just on the transition for the commitments that have been made. And that's not $95 trillion that will be just burnt. That is a business opportunity for somebody. And what we want is to see more Caribbean businesses leading in that charge, more SIDS businesses leading in taking up those opportunities to create those new solutions, and to be able to capitalize on that so that the benefit to us is this new economy, not just, oh, we're trying to survive, we're trying to sort of stave off immediate death. It has to be something more positive, more hopeful, more optimistic in terms of how we move forward. So it is looking at the opportunity in climate action and not so much, the devastation that's possible, which is true. But if we are not working towards something that is hopeful for all of us, I think we are paralyzed by fear versus, propelled by optimism and hope. And that's what we need to go towards.
Thank you, Raquel. I could see some questions coming in remotely. If we could get those up on the screen, I'll do my best to read them from the distance. And also if anyone in the room, they're behind me, thank you. If anyone in the room has any questions, please do raise your hand and we can get a microphone to you as well. So I saw here a question from Viliami Kasanawaka. A tool that has gained considerable status and adoption in recent times in SIDS is the blue economy as a key determinant of resilient and sustainable economic development for SIDS. Doubts remain because of deep sea mining and how this interrelates with the blue economy. And so the question is, the blue economy in terms of, is the blue economy a form of neocolonialism? And do we exploit rather than promoting local action? That's a big question for us, Vili. Thank you for that. I'll invite anyone who wants to comment on their thoughts on the blue economy. And maybe Aparna, as your colleague asked this question, and you are the director of Blue Economy, we can go to you for your thoughts.
So you can hear me now? So in terms of, yeah, okay. So in terms of the deep sea mining, as it is part of the blue economy development, it is part of the blue economy development. However, there's a precautionary approach that needs to be taken. And also in the Pacific, we have, if a country is interested in exploring deep sea mining, they first do the exploration stage, and the International Seabed Mining Seabed Authority actually assists countries in doing research and supporting the countries in making a decision on whether it is viable for the country. Of course, deep sea mining is harmful to the environment, but it is depending on the country in which way they want to progress. But for the Pacific Island countries, I think this is very carefully analyzed. And I think one of the countries, Tonga, was a bit interested in deep sea mining at the exploration stage, actually. So nothing has progressed in the Pacific in terms of deep sea mining at present.
Thank you, Aparna. Sorry, we did struggle to hear you a little bit in the room, but I think we got the gist, and again, the people watching online should be able to have heard you better. One really important aspect of this leadership conversation is youth, and I want to talk about to the panel, what opportunities have they seen for young people to not only get involved and influence the negotiations. I think this is really important. How can young people have an influence on the conversations, but also get the experience needed to take leadership positions in the future as well? And so AOSIS Fellowship is one aspect of this. Palau also brings on youth delegates in the negotiations. So I'm sure you all have different aspects to share about why this is important and how this is working. So maybe Ivory, you can start with your thoughts.
Sure. And just to address the last question really quickly, I think fundamentally we have enough resources. Can you guys hear me? We have enough resources. It's just not spread out equally and we're not using it equally. So instead of looking to the deep sea to exploit more resources, we need to manage what we have right now. And Palau is one of the first countries who signed the ban on deep sea mining. So we invite all the other island nations as well to join us in that effort. And then in terms of your question with youth involvement and opportunities, I would say that it's really amazing how involved the youth are in the Pacific delegations. There's a lot of youth that are negotiators this year, but we can't just show up at these conferences and know what we're doing. We have to be trained, we have to learn, we have to know the history. And that's why it's important we learn from the senior members of our delegations. That's one way. And also there's a new training program that was developed just this year and launched called the Climate Youth Negotiator Program. That program has funded almost 60 of us youth, trained us since June to learn how the UNFCCC processes work and to make sure that we're part of our delegations. Programs like that, also programs like WIDO, which is an organization that helps women from developing countries attend these kinds of conferences. It's important as youth, as women, that we are able to be involved in these negotiations, but also that we're able to be trained to understand all the processes that take place here, because we all have our specialties in the work that we do. We understand, ocean action, climate action, but in terms of the details and the technical aspects, that training is really helpful. And as a youth negotiator this year, I'm really grateful that I've had the opportunity to take part in many of those programs.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ivory. Moana, would you like to go next?
Just supporting what Ivory just said. Yes, being in those negotiation rooms is a totally different ballgame altogether. You can be taught for years and years on the theory of it, but to be in the room and understanding the different dynamics is a total different ballgame, just as I said. So I think we need more capacity in this as youths, because this is for us, and we need to keep developing youths to be involved in this area of climate negotiations, because as well, there's a high turnover rate for us in the Pacific in our climate teams. And I think this is an area that is lacking, and we need representation and louder voices in those negotiation rooms, which I think is lacking at the moment. Thank you.
Augusto, do you have anything to add on the questions that came forward?
Yeah, I think it's up to national capacity to decide how you can promote the young negotiator in the process. Because I've been attending this COP maybe at least 5 or 6 times. But when you see the representation, some parties, they bring more negotiator to participate in the process so that they can, understand how to continue negotiation in the future. But some of them, it may be, political issues or decisions, sometimes not really negotiators. But for our case, we are trying to, to bring some negotiators to join the COP, and also at the same time, like encouraging them how to attend the different thematic areas as part of capacity building, so that in the future, once the elders left, at least there are some people in the country to continue what we are already negotiating in the process. But as other colleagues say, that a small island state and also one of the LDC member states, we are facing financial resources how to bring more negotiators to attend the COP. So I think we really need to think about this when you're talking about negotiation. It's not only about how you can influence art parties to promote adaptation and mitigation action, but also how developed countries or international NGOs, organizations to support small island countries or LDCs to bring more negotiators. Like colleague from Palau said, that WEDO is one of the organizations to, to promote negotiator come to attend the COPs. Timor-Leste also benefit already 3 times. So hopefully, in the future, it's not only one, but maybe, the international agencies together with the other parties maybe can bring more, negotiators, especially the young negotiators, and as well as gender balance. In our case, from National Directorate of Climate Change, we have 5 delegations, and three of them are women, and they are young. So this is one of the approach that how we can promote the young negotiators in the process. But again, sometimes political decision make things different. So even though you wanted to promote them, but sometimes decision may be different. So I'm not sure, but maybe some other countries you have different conditions. But in some cases, because I've been working for government quite sometimes, 20 years, so I know the process, and sometimes this kind of things can happen. Yeah.
Thank you, Augusto. On that topic of gender balance and the importance of female leadership, Raquel, your fellow Trinidadian will give a shout out to Caroline Mayer-Toby. I'm not sure if you've seen this yet. She has been working on a project called She Leads, which has demonstrated the importance of having women representation in the negotiation rooms. And it was amazing how they were able to put statistical values on how female representation in negotiations and in parliaments leads to better environmental outcomes. Not just to be able to say that, but to statistically demonstrate that, I think was really fascinating. What are your thoughts on the importance, I'm sure you have many, on the importance of women's leadership in these spaces?
Yes. So Caroline is not only a friend, she's a neighbor, and she's just joined She Changes Climate, which I think is fantastic. And they are building upon UN data on the countries with more gender balanced leadership have better climate outcomes. And it is undeniable. And I think we're seeing that across the board. This isn't new information, that when you have more gender balance, you have better outcomes for companies, you have better outcomes for people, you have better satisfaction, you have better everything. And the challenge that we find is that despite this knowledge, we're not seeing enough women in many of these spaces. So we definitely need to promote, and I think we need to call it out. Whenever we don't see enough gender balance, we need to say that there is a problem. And so we do that a lot. If we see a panel and there's only one woman, we're like, no, that's not enough. If you're not at least approaching 50%, it's a problem. Here, a little off balance, but that's okay.
With Apana virtually, we're at 50-50.
50-50. Excellent. Well done. Well done. I forgot about the virtual participants. But it's really important because it's not enough to just have one token woman at the table. Until you have close to gender parity, you don't have a safe space where differing opinions will come to the surface. And so it's really important for better outcomes and for, not just for women, but for women and for men. And I think sometimes people forget that. They think, oh, it's a fairness issue. It is, but it isn't. It's much bigger than fairness. It's really about better outcomes for everybody, having more diverse perspectives.
Absolutely. Ivory, any comments to add?
Sure. Definitely having more perspectives, but I think also highlighting heartfelt leadership, that in these negotiation spaces, I mean, it's a reality, egos are involved. We need to be emotionally intelligent as well as, mentally intelligent to solve these problems that we're facing today. Where we're from in Palau, as a matrilineal society, our women elders actually choose our chiefs. And women have the best interest of the community in mind, and they choose the chiefs that do the most work for the community. That's how you become a chief. That's how you are a leader. Today, we have a modern system of government, which I have to say, unfortunately, has more men than women in it, which is something I think we should work on solving in general in Palau and other countries as well.
Okay, thank you very much. So we've talked about a variety of aspects of leadership and what that means in the small island states context. Just for the last 10 minutes to wrap up, I want to get opinions from any of the panelists on what are the opportunities, especially for the Pacific, but from other small island regions, to demonstrate leadership on the international level. There are some amazing groups like Pacific Climate Warriors that have really done great work to change the narrative on Pacific Islands being vulnerable, being victims, to being leaders. And I think that's so, so important in these conversations. That leadership can look like various things. Again, in the negotiation rooms, pushing forward for the rights and reaffirming that the people who have not created this problem should not be the ones paying for it. But it can also be through high levels or high commitments to renewables and various other commitments. So I welcome any of the panelists to jump in on this one to say what actions they have seen that demonstrate leadership by small island states, and also how this can be effective on changing the global narrative. Don't be shy.
So certainly, I think that what we see in the Caribbean that works well for us is when we speak from a singular voice, because we're all small. No one's listening to us individually. Luckily, we have Mia Motley, who presents on an international stage and gets us international recognition. But the more that we have a simple, succinct message that is the same across all of the islands in the Caribbean, and we're speaking to the people who represent the politicians, that seems to be the most effective means of getting acknowledgement and getting attention. But we also need to be relentless in our fight for momentum. I mean, yes, we're hearing a lot of talk and we're not seeing enough action that's following, but we need to understand that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And we have to just keep pushing for action, but we need to speak from a singular voice, and we need to make our messages simple enough and understand what it takes to actually get action taken.
I'll ask Aparna to come in now briefly on that question, because as part of a regional organization that covers, I think, a dozen or so Pacific countries, maybe there's something you can add to Raquel's comments, and also just comment on some of the initiatives that PIDF is doing to demonstrate leadership on blue economy and energy.
Thank you, James. I think Pacific seeds are practically prone to the effects of climate change, and I think we are one of the most vulnerable regions. I think the destruction of marine and coastal ecosystems in the Pacific weakens the ocean's capacity to act as a climate regulator. And these issues will not only affect the pea seeds or seeds for that matter, but will have a global impact as well. Hence, I feel that a greater international cooperation is required now more than ever to advance climate action. And I think a collective voice, a Pacific voice is important, and we have been doing it. I think all the Pacific comes together in times like this and voice out. So I'm really proud to say that Pacific is one of the regions that do not hesitate to voice their thoughts and push the climate change agenda at the global arena.
Thank you, Apana. I think, Ivory, you were going to jump in?
Yeah, along with what Raquel and Apana said, definitely a simple message is very important. I totally agree. And I would to see that in the Pacific region as well. I also think a holistic approach, along with what Apana said, holistic. Our problems cross many sectors in islands. So agriculture, conservation, renewable energy, blue economy, that's essentially what it is, right? So I would say a holistic solution is necessary as well. And I would say islands are in the perfect position to showcase those kinds of solutions. I'm talking marine ocean renewable energy when we're discussing mitigation, right? I'm talking preserving our mangroves and seagrass when we're talking adaptation, those kinds of solutions integrated together to support all our sectors in combating climate change.
Thanks, Ivory. Philemon?
Just adding to that, yeah, I think localizing this concept is a very important thing that we can prioritize as small and developing states. One example is we will be soon endeavoring into beginning renewable bus services in a pilot program in one of our urban areas. And the same concept that we have here with the buses that we come to Cork, this will not work for us. So we have to integrate it with the buses that we have back at home. So our buses, we do not use the air conditioning. We have open windows and use the natural sea breeze, and it's manufactured in back at home by the local manufacturers and developers. So we need to integrate it with the technology that's available for renewable energy, and that it could work better and have a longer life frame when we develop projects of renewable energy. I think that for us is a big thing that we can push on localizing these concepts, which I think is a big thing.
I think there is a question specific to Timor-Leste from one of the audience about how country manage the economic driver of fossil fuel production and aspiration of low carbon development path. I know that Timor-Leste, right now we still rely on oil and gas resources, but the country already think ahead how to promote sustainable development in the country. From National Directorate of Climate Change, we just finalized our climate change policy. It has been approved by the Council of Ministers. And right now, we are drafting a Climate Change Act. It's in the process. And when you're talking about the energy, from Ministry of Public Works, we also have draft of energy policy and also energy decree law. So this policies framework can regulate how the country think about the sustainable development, even though we are still rely on oil and gas. And then we also try how to promote initiative of blue economy in the country. There are many activities and programs supported from by the foreigners like European Union, US, and Australia in the country. So I think even though we are part of the small island states, but we need to recognize ourselves that Timor-Leste is an LDC, and we need to develop the country. But it doesn't mean that we want to degrade or pollute our environment. But when you are thinking about the economy, you need to think how you can manage your economy in sustainable manner so that your country can survive. But from environmental point of view, you can also preserve your environment. And from our State Secretary for Environment, we are also an authority called Environmental License Decree, Environmental Agency, Licensing Agency. And this authority also regulate all the activities, development activities in the country, including how to explore oil and gas in Timor Sea. So I think this is our situation, and we are talking about the pollution emission at the country level. Timor's pollution is like emission is 0.003%. It's still far from what the global target, but it doesn't mean that we want to continue to make this situation harsh. But from political point of view, we also need to develop the country. So I think this is our situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Augusto, Filimone, Raquel, Ivory, Apana joining remotely. Really appreciate you taking the time this morning to be here. I'll make one comment on Friday's session with the Pacific Island Development Forum on Friday morning. There'll be a session that I'll be chairing discussing the PIDF's program to solarize public buildings in 11 Pacific Island nations. So we'll be discussing that same place, 11 a.m. on Friday, and anyone interested in that topic would invite you to join. And also just to comment on Island Innovation, our daily bulletin will be featuring the recording for this and a number of other island sessions. That daily bulletin is going out covering all news relevant to small island states and other islands every day. So anyone watching, you're welcome to submit your own events, your own news, and we'll be sharing that. We have over 5,000 people reading that daily bulletin so far. So really happy that that's got interest from both people attending COP and also those not able to attend following along remotely. So, and finally, thank you to the Moana Pacific Pavilion and all of the team for the amazing job that you all have done. Really appreciate the fantastic communication, especially Audrey and everyone working